Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Same-sex marriage has been a legal reality in England, Wales and Scotland since 2014, and gay marriage is already a right in the Isle of Man and is legal or being legalised in the Channel Islands. But there is one part of the UK where you still cannot marry a same-sex partner, Northern Ireland. It also means that couples who wed in Great Britain will not have their marriage recognised in Northern Ireland. Any legislation to enable same-sex marriage is a matter for the Assembly at Stormont, where the Democratic Unionist Party have blocked it. But with the collapse of talks to get the devolved administration up and running, there are now calls for Westminster to legislate. In a written reply to the Labour MP, Conor McGinn, Northern Ireland Secretary Karen Bradley said the issue should be addressed in the Northern Ireland Assembly. But the power of the Westminster Parliament to legislate remains unaffected. If this issue were to be raised in Westminster, the government's policy is to allow a free vote on matters of conscience, such as equal marriage. And her shadow, Labour's Owen Smith, stated in the absence of a Stormont bill, would she consider legislating similarly to extend equal marriage rights to Northern Ireland? We believe that she should, and we will support her if she does so. Conor McGinn is in our Salford newsroom and joins us now. Conor McGinn, you've had a confirmation from the Northern Ireland Secretary Karen Bradley that Westminster could legislate and that the Tories wouldn't whip the vote, tell their MPs what to do. But that doesn't mean that same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland is going to happen anytime soon, does it?
Well, I'm taking forward a 10-minute rule bill at the end of March. That can decisively test the mood of the House of Commons. If anyone objects to extending equal marriage to Northern Ireland, they can oppose that and put it to a vote. I'm very confident that we would win any vote, and I think it's then for the government to legislate. But let me be very clear, my preference would be for a fully functioning, power-sharing executive and assembly to do this, but people can't wait for their basic rights any longer, and that's why I've taken the decision, along with my colleagues in the Labour Party and others, I'm sure, to pursue this at Westminster.
Right. What do you think about that, Tim Stanley? I mean, isn't it right that if there isn't a power-sharing, devolved administration functioning, that people shouldn't be forced to wait to find out if they can actually practice same-sex marriage?
Apparently some have concluded that there is a constitutional argument for that. But of course, excuse me, in the Assembly there is something called a petition of concern, a device that was created to ensure that one idea, even if it is supported by a majority in the Assembly, can never be imposed upon another community. So the last time there was a vote on same-sex marriage, the Assembly actually by majority voted to introduce same-sex marriage. But because of this petition of concern, because it wasn't a supermajority, it couldn't be imposed. And if you look at the breakdown of the voting, essentially the unionist community, or at least the elected representatives of the unionist community, are opposed to this. So imagine what it could do to the Northern Irish settlement if in Westminster someone imposes something which is of enormous sectarian controversy upon Northern Ireland.
Conor McGinn, you're shaking your head.
This is not about people being unionist or nationalists. It's not even about people being gay or being married. It's about people being equal. If my constituents of the same sex who love their partner can get married in St Helens, if people can in Cardiff and in Edinburgh and in Dublin, then they should be able to do so in Belfast as well.
Right.
But there are other issues too. Consider Irish language. One could say that the teaching of Irish language in Northern Ireland is an equality issue. Why shouldn't it be taught in the state schools? But you wouldn't want Westminster imposing that. It's very obvious that that would undermine the settlement in Northern Ireland. Why therefore do it with same-sex marriage? This is something that the whole thing was stitched together in order to prevent exactly this kind of thing. And I fear that this bill, I understand the intentions behind it, but it could end up proving to be a provocative act.
I think there is a majority in the Northern Ireland Assembly for equal marriage. The majority public opinion, every opinion poll taken has shown is in favour of equal marriage too, and I think this is the right thing to do. People in Northern Ireland should not be discriminated against. It's 50 years on from the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association taking to the streets to demand equal rights. We've talked about Roy Jenkins earlier in this programme. It's 50 years on from homosexuality being decriminalised. It is not right, and it is not all right for people in Northern Ireland, gay people in Northern Ireland, to be discriminated against.
What do you say about the concern raised by Tim Stanley, though, that it could actually antagonise sectarian relations if the polls suggested that the unionist community wasn't as in favour of same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland, and it would be imposed on them from Westminster.
I don't think that that's wholly accurate, but the DUP can't have it both ways, you know. They've called for direct rule. They want Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. They believe that Westminster has an important role to play, and so they therefore can't really complain if Westminster acts decisively on this issue of equal marriage. And they have the opportunity to oppose it when my bill comes forward at the end of March. Put it to the House of Commons. If the House of Commons decides it's in favour, like the Northern Ireland Assembly has already decided, then the government has a duty to act, and Karen Bradley should bring forward legislation.
Right. Forgive me for being cynical, Conor McGinn, but this is also about politics. It's not just about the principle, is it, at the heart of the motion and the bill that you would like to bring forward? Because the Prime Minister is dependent on the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, for her parliamentary majority, and that party is opposed to same-sex marriage. So, obviously, this could make it very difficult for the relationship between the government and the DUP.
Well, that's a matter for Theresa May. The concern, I think, is that whether it's in terms of negotiations at Stormont around the overall settlement and future for Northern Ireland and re-establishing the institutions, or on issues like equal marriage, she and her government are compromised by their relationship with the DUP and their reliance on the DUP. But the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has made clear this will be a free vote. I'm very confident that there will be an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons that supports equal marriage. So in that sense, it's up to every MP to make his or her own mind up about whether to support this or not.
Heather Stewart, what's your opinion on the idea of it being imposed on Northern Ireland because there isn't a devolved assembly there at the moment?
Well, it underlines the fact that a year-long suspension in the Assembly is incredibly problematic, and the way that the government seems to fail to get a grip on it is alarming. And although I share some of Tim's concerns about unravelling a very sort of delicate mess, I do think it's an anomaly, and it's about rights, and it's also about people's lives. And we saw when the legislation changed in the rest of the UK what a huge difference it made to kind of couples who've been living together for many years and were able to formalise their relationships. And we're talking about people's relationships and lives, and who can't formalise their relationship legally, and it's a rights issue. I think Conor McGinn's right there.
How problematic would it be for Theresa May in her relationship with the DUP?
Well, it's embarrassing, isn't it? She relies on their votes in the Commons through this confidence and supply arrangement, and some of the Liberals in her own party, Ruth Davidson, for example, made a fuss at the time the deal was struck about the fact that this was a party that has some rather old-fashioned views, let's say, as we would see it. So I think it would be embarrassing for Theresa May, and she's already in a position where it's hard for her to appear as a sort of neutral broker in those talks in Northern Ireland, even without issues like this blowing up.
Conor McGinn, thank you very much for joining us today. We did ask to speak to a minister from the Northern Ireland office, but no one was available, and the Democratic Unionist Party also turned down our request for an interview. Oh, well, we are Billy No Mates.
Northern Ireland was condemned today by a UN committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It attacked the fact that Northern Ireland criminalises abortion, restricting it even in cases of rape, incest or fatal fetal abnormality. The committee said the restrictions cause great harm and suffering, and that is a pretty routine criticism. But the strange thing about it is that it's aimed at a piece of the UK, and yet most people in the UK would probably agree with it. Northern Ireland has allowed itself to become an exceptional piece of the United Kingdom in clinging to some socially conservative norms. It's the one nation not to have same-sex marriage, for example. And yet, it's a complicated picture there, because polls in Northern Ireland show support for liberalisation of the abortion law and support for same-sex marriage. Matthew Thompson's been looking at the strength of social conservatism there.
The history of Ireland is traced upon the cross. In this land of saints and scholars, religion held immense power over minds, lives, and indeed deaths. Divided as they were, the island's squabbling churches were united by their stance on public morals.
You will legislate perversion and immorality.
But in recent years, most notably in the Republic, such attitudes have shifted. Scandals have shaken public faith in the Catholic Church. Secularism is on the march. The Republic's gay marriage referendum in 2015 left Northern Ireland nearly alone in Western Europe as one of the few places where same-sex marriage was still forbidden by law. Take the issue of abortion, however, and Ireland's isolation is even starker. Strict laws north and south of the border mean the island ranks alongside Andorra, Malta and San Marino as the most restrictive places in Europe. A forthcoming referendum in the Republic could compound Northern Ireland's isolation. With its religious quarrels and fractious political landscape, Northern Ireland can seem, to large swathes of British opinion, a place frozen in time. And nowhere is the country's social conservatism more in evidence than here in Ballymena, the buckle of Northern Ireland's Bible Belt.
If you were voting, would you think it's important that the politicians were represented religious values?
Yes, certainly. That's why I do support DUP, because they do have a lot of religious values on same-sex marriage and stuff where, you know, where's that all coming from?
I have nothing against gay people in any way, but I don't think it's right for them to be married. Definitely not. Not the way I was brought up.
The DUP is not the only party to hold these views. The Ulster Unionist Party, for one, is split on such issues. But the DUP's unique brand of fundamentalism finds fertile ground here.
The religion of the DUP informs the party's attitude to such questions as same-sex marriage and abortion. The fact is that on a scale of 0 to 10, when we asked, how much should faith and church condition the outlook of the DUP, members scale that at almost 7 out of 10. It's difficult to imagine any other party across the United Kingdom having such an outlook, wanting faith and church to condition the outlook of their party.
The power to legislate on social issues rests with Northern Ireland's devolved government, when it actually sits.
The Assembly here at Stormont has declined to endorse more liberal legislation on both gay marriage and abortion. In 2015, a vote to legalise gay marriage was actually passed by a majority of 1, but the DUP were able to use a controversial veto power, known as a petition of concern, to block the legislation. This move, in defiance of both majority public opinion and the majority of Assembly members, provoked outrage.
The 2017 Northern Ireland General Election Survey indicated that 54% of people supported same-sex marriage. Only 23% opposed it. Other polls have put support higher still. But only 50% of unionists were in favour, against 66% of nationalists. And of DUP supporters, almost exactly as many oppose as support same-sex marriage.
People's views in Northern Ireland on same-sex marriage are conditioned more by age than necessarily religion these days. And, with a new generation coming through, the chances are that at some point same-sex marriage will be allowed in Northern Ireland.
As symbols of that new generation go, it's hard to look past the Sunflower Bar in central Belfast. At the height of the Troubles, it was the scene of a loyalist terror attack that left 3 people dead. Now it's a trendy bar that attracts a younger, more progressive crowd.
These issues are incredibly important to students.
These young people voice frustration with a political system that they feel isn't working for them.
People, for a variety of reasons, continue to vote on a sort of community affiliation basis rather than particular social issues. So it isn't effective to necessarily say to people, you should vote for this particular party because they will bring abortion reform or marriage equality. It simply doesn't work that way in Northern Ireland yet.
We know that the kind of society that we want to be a part of, and we know that there is overwhelming public support for some of these issues, so it's really disappointing that some of our leaders can't actually enact that change.
Olivia, you're the president of the National Union of Students, Ireland, and you've met actually with a lot of the parties, and I think as recently as last week with the DUP to talk about some of these issues. How did you come away from that?
I don't think that anything has come out of these talks that wasn't really to be expected personally. I think, if anything, one of the things that's become crystal clear is that for any progress to be made in any sort of area in legislation in Northern Ireland, the petition of concern is most definitely in need of some desperate reform, and it is unclear as to whether or not any of the parties have a clear path forward for how that should be done.
Sinn Féin have made much in recent years of what they call the equality agenda, but their position on abortion has only recently softened, and they still don't officially support any unrestricted access. The nationalist SDLP, sister party of Labour, remains staunchly pro-life. In October, the Supreme Court heard an appeal from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission against the country's abortion laws. That judgment is expected within the next month. The most recent Northern Ireland Life and Times survey suggests that abortion is another area in which politicians are out of step with public opinion. Ask people whether abortion should be given in the case of serious fetal abnormalities or in the case of rape or incest, and significant majorities are in favour. But ask if a woman should be able to have an abortion on demand, and the balance tips significantly. Fully 60% of people are opposed in this instance. Overall, Catholics are more likely than Protestants to oppose abortion.
For Sinn Féin, I think that what we see is a changing relationship of the citizens of Ireland with the Catholic Church. So over the past 20 years you see that, but Sinn Féin also having their position on the constitutional question, which is overwhelmingly supported. So they can have this liberal agenda that's there. For the SDLP, they're more conservative traditionally, but I do think that they're going to change as attitudes change on the island of Ireland, where they will not want to be caught on the wrong side of social change.
So what hope for change for those who seek it? Absent reform, delivering same-sex marriage will be an uphill struggle for a restored assembly at Stormont, abortion even more so, though of course the Supreme Court could force the issue. Should Stormont remain empty, direct rule ministers could legislate from London, but that will hardly be a priority for a government dealing with Brexit and in bed with the DUP. Short term then, in spite of the will of a majority of its people, it seems likely that Ulster's peculiar political system will continue to say no.
Matthew Thompson there.
I've been getting